The investigation is formally closed and he is resigning from the Justice Department. Let's bring in Wendy Patrick, our legal analyst now. Wow, your thoughts?
Wow.
Well, let me change what I said right before we started. Maybe he did write it last night. Okay. It was short and sweet and to the point. Notice what he said, a couple of noteworthy parts of that stuck out to me. He talked about the indictments. Really, remember, he speaks through indictments. That's what he did throughout the whole 22 months. He kept reiterating the report speaks for itself, and also signaled to Congress in a not so subtle manner that that's what he would say if they chose to subpoena him. They're not going to get anywhere.
Right.
Now, I know what everybody's going to be talking about after the fact is a statement that if they had found the president did not commit a crime, they would have said so. That is probably all we'll hear about afterwards. But I just wanted to point out, he really did correct the record in terms of there isn't any behind the scenes information that wasn't included in the report.
Right.
He put everything he wanted to say in the report, so there should be now no need to testify, to basically be subpoenaed to testify further.
He basically said he's not going to do it. He says, this report is my testimony. Explain to me, if you could, Wendy, when he mentioned charging a president with a crime was never something they could consider. Is that why no statement was made? Clarify that from the legalese to like a normal layman language, if you could.
Well, we've long known about the Department of Justice policy that you can't indict a sitting president. And the question has surrounded whether or not that was the reason that Special Counsel Mueller chose not to basically reach a conclusion on the obstruction problem, which is volume 2 of the report. He said that in the Mueller report, but there's been a lot of editorialism by both sides as to, well, what did he really mean when he said that?
Yep.
You just heard him. He clarified what he meant when he said that. This is a long-standing policy. He considered this, and he also considered the fact that it wouldn't be fair to bring that kind of an indictment or that kind of charge or even reach that conclusion in this report.
When you can't go to court and defend yourself.
That's right.
So, I mean, after he says, you know, that the report is my testimony, he even said it earlier on, the office work speaks for itself, you know, what his office has done. Do you think Congress is going to, oh, okay, we're done.
I don't think Congress is ever going to be done with this. And the reason I say that, Chris, is we've just looked at the way that they have, really, they want the underlying sources and methods and all the different things that underlie this report. Also note that Bob Mueller discussed that as well. He said that's not really within the purview of his office any longer. That's being decided elsewhere. But yes, Congress would still like to have more information. Why? Because they all, not that a lot of Congress people are on board with this just yet, but we still have the I word hanging out there. At least there are some Democrats, and now I guess one Republican, that thinks maybe the president should be impeached. But the bottom line is, if Congress sees it as their charge to pursue an investigation, as we know they do, then they are going to continue to at least request, if not Mueller in person, the underlying facts and circumstances that allowed him to write this report.
And he finally spoke. You know, we were talking about how he hasn't publicly spoken since the investigation started 2 years ago, and then since the report finally came out. And then, you know, close friends to his, I guess, were the ones coming out saying he doesn't want to be part of this political parade, so to speak. So the fact that he's come out, he's like, this is what it is. The report is my testimony. We'll never hear from him again. He wants to resign as special counsel, and he said, I want to live that private life. I thought, okay. He's done.
I'm going to amend my comments about thinking he wrote it last night. That was kind of tongue-in-cheek anyway. The fact that it was short doesn't mean it wasn't incredibly thoughtful and deliberative.
Sure,
because Chris and Raul, both of you have brought up the substance that went very deep. The fact that he would prefer not to testify in front of Congress. Of course, he stopped short of saying he wouldn't, but also that he wants Congress to respect his right to return to the private sector after giving up 2 of what probably would have been great years of his life were they not dominated, were they not dominated by this report.
I get that. I get that statement. But do you really think Robert Mueller gets up on this international stage, in essence, and says things like had the president not committed a crime, we would have said so, would not reach a determination one way or another? Do you think he makes those statements and thinks, okay, we're just going to sit back and wait a minute? He just dropped a bomb on people.
Yeah, he absolutely does not think that Congress is going to drop it. But nonetheless, he still would like to at least...
Is he almost saying to Congress, here you go, pick up and run?
What I think he was trying to do is prevent the need to have Congress subpoena him to testify, because they wouldn't get anywhere with him beyond what he just said. Had he not made this public statement, they probably would have continued to pursue having him testify and say exactly what he just said. So perhaps by voicing it in a forum that is without questions and without controversy and without that adversarial nature of congressional testimony, maybe he heads him off at the pass. I suppose we'll wait and see. I'm sure I'll be back in here discussing it if they call him in.
I know that. What was the goal then? If you can't indict a sitting president, what was the goal of the second part of the investigation, obstruction of justice by the president, if you can't really say one way or another?
There could have been a couple different goals, and it's along very partisan lines. The dueling narratives surrounding what did Mueller mean when he said what he did goes along one of two paths. Now, if you talk to some of the conservative folks, they would explain, well, that's not the whole basis on which he decided not to find a conclusion on part 2. They didn't have sufficient evidence to go forward. That's a very valid basis. Now, of course, the Democrats would say, no, he meant what he said if they would have, in fact, he just reiterated it this morning. Because of the long-standing policy of not being able to indict a sitting president, he chose not to reach a conclusion on part 2 of the report, which dealt with the obstruction of justice. But even if you adopt that standpoint, even if you adopt that version, you still don't get to the, but there was enough evidence to go forward, because he never said that.
I'm looking at Twitter. I'm waiting for the president's response on Twitter if it comes after the statement.
It'll come.
It's going to come. Getting lost in all this, indictment, you can't charge the president, is part 1 of this investigation, which did reach a solid conclusion. There was multiple systematic efforts to interfere. When you start focusing on that aspect of it, we got a lot of things to worry about with our next election.
That's so true, Earl, and I'm so glad you pointed that out, because we become so focused on part 2, whether the president obstructed justice, that we completely forget we've got a major election coming up that we want to preserve the integrity of, that we really should be focusing on how do we make sure there isn't a repeat of 2016. Great point.
And what are we going to do about it, though? Because that's the real question. The Trump and the indictment and what he did in the obstruction, okay, we get it. The special counsel couldn't do anything about it, but this is going to happen again.
Let's look forward. Sure, we have to make sure that it doesn't happen again, but part of the way we do that is making sure that we understand what happened and take the preventative measures we need to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. Great point, Raul.
I'm reloading the page. The president still hasn't tweeted. Wendy Patrick, what would we do without you?
Oh, it is so exciting.
Just stay here.
Okay.
Just camp out in the back.
Probably should.
Oh, my goodness gracious.